Amanda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back. So good to be here.
So, I have your book here, and I have to say that this made me cry tears of joy because, I mean, it's called Protect the Joy. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's just so important of a piece of work for sports parents to understand how to make sure that this sport experience stays fun and it starts fun too, especially for those younger ages. I know there's a special place in your heart with the younger ages, with mine, because I work with a lot of them. It's just, we want this to be joyful, and that's what this book is all about. And we're going to talk about how to protect the joy today. So, Amanda, first question. What must we protect the joy at all costs for our young athletes? And I know in the book you get into a lot of the science behind motivation in kids, and I would love for us to just start there.
The number one reason why we need to protect the joy in sport at all cost is because kids play sport to have fun, and they quit sport at alarming rates because they report that it's no longer fun. That, in and of a nutshell, is why I wanted to present the research in a digestible way for parents and coaches at the youth level, is that there are so many easy ways to keep it fun. And the important thing about joy and fun that I think is really imperative is that it doesn't mean soft and lazy. And I think oftentimes when we hear people talk about kids in sport, unfortunately, we hear things like soft, lazy, not tough. Kids are really tough. Kids are very resilient, and kids these days are not lazy. When I was a kid, I was watching a lot of Smurfs. Um, there was not a lot of organized sport until I was a little older, and there was a lot of downtime. Kids are very scheduled now in this generation, and I don't see them being lazy. So if we can keep it fun and we keep them in the game, then sport has the opportunity to teach all of these magical life lessons that we say it can do. But those don't happen magically. We have to really be intentional to keep it joyful, and then again to teach these life lessons that we believe, you and I, wholeheartedly, that sport can teach kids.
So, you talk about parents and coaches being able to protect the joy because the onus does lie on all of us as adults. So, let's start with coaches first. How can coaches protect the joy in our young players?
Oh my goodness, how much time do we have? The first thing I want to do is thank the coaches for stepping up in the community. I you go online and everything is trying to elicit this emotional reaction about youth sport, which is one of the reasons I wanted to write a book, because I see so many amazing coaches stepping up to the plate in our communities, but they don't necessarily need any education to be teaching kids sport. If you want to be a teacher, you go to university, you get your credentials, you go and you're a teacher, you learn about child and adolescent psychology, you learn about best teaching practices. But whenever I coach my kids, like, I really just need to raise my hand and, like, okay, someone who breathes, you're in. And so there's so many, how they can protect the joy at the youth level as a coach starts in everything. I mean, the relationships they build with the kids, the way they communicate with the kids, the way they choose playing time, the way they communicate with the parents, the type of practice, their demeanor, all of these ways they can have a joyful experience with kids. And it is not easy. This is why I have so much respect for the people, even if they're falling short, for showing up. What you won't find in this book is shame and blame. I think parents, with everything, you have some people falling short as coaches and parents, and you have people who are doing extraordinary things. And I wanted to create something that wasn't going to be a hot take, like generate a us versus them, but the tagline to the book is a positive, collaborative approach to youth sport. So coaches can try to, in education, we call it differentiated instruction. How can we help the kid who's a little more advanced keep reaching? How can we help the beginner kid feel motivated to keep trying. Also, I talk about, you and I have heard a lot about relative age, when in the calendar you were born, what kind of experiences you had. And a lot of people often feel like those with a higher relative age than chronological age win the lottery. And I kind of suggest in the book that it's the opposite, because they're having a false sense that they're not earning their confidence, right? And real confidence comes from competence and effort. And confidence is something interesting because it takes so much to gain, but it can be very fleeting, and it can be disrupted quite easily, which is why I would suggest then that coaches create a really positive team culture around attitudes, beliefs, and norms, and also talking about that in the book. So to answer the question, it's kind of like I can think about every chapter. So I don't want to be too long-winded, but these are just some of the topics that hone in on in the book as to how coaches can really protect that joy and foster it.
Let's hang on coaches for now before we move on to parents, because like you said, there's so much to coaches protecting the joy. And one thing that you kept bringing up in the book was equal playing time for a certain age range. And I love that you touched on this because it was very science based on child development, motivation, learning physical skills and motor skills. So let's talk about playing time because it is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. But maybe when should it be equal and why?
Yeah, love to talk about playing time. Where do I start? Okay, I'm going to just very briefly talk about a fourth grade math class. Okay, let's say you have a group of 9 and 10-year-olds during grade 4, and they're learning math, and they're told, you have 40 minutes to take this math assessment. The purpose of an assessment is to guide the teacher's instruction. So I'm telling this group, let's call them A, you're going to have 40 minutes. Now, the kids in this group are put there because math comes pretty easy to them. Okay, so they're put there for 40 minutes. They're to take this assessment, and they're told, if you don't get it right, don't worry, you'll have 40 minutes to retake it tomorrow. You can, don't feel any stress. We're just wanting to see where you are so that I can guide my instruction. And then you have a group of 9 and 10-year-olds in group B, also in grade 4, in their same class. And they're told you're going to take this, and they struggle with math. That's why they're in that group. They get 10 minutes to take the math assessment. And they're told that if it's not kind of perfect, tomorrow they get 5 minutes. That would be crazy, right? So one of the reasons I wanted to write the book is like, how come in education we teach kids things this way? They're the same age developmentally, but now in sport, we're going to justify giving a kid 100% or 90% of the game and someone else on the team 10 to 20% of the game. And let's all face it, we know the kids who are in the 10 to 20% of the game, they kind of have to be perfect or they're getting less the next time. Whereas those who have the luxury to make mistakes, to be creative, to goof up sometimes, when there's no consequence to that, you're losing the later developers. You're losing the kids who are more beginner skilled because it's not fun to watch your friends play. It comes down to that. Now, ideally, clubs have enough teams where they can be with people of similar skill and speed and strength, because that is the best place for sport development. And that's why something like the athlete development model exists, right? So we're not opposed to tiering people according to skill in sport. What we're saying is if you keep them on a team, let them develop at the same rate. At the same time, if someone's not showing up, or they're not being a great teammate, or they're not trying, then there is a place to say, hey, these are our norms and our standards. These are our expectations. We need to adjust here. But the playing time also, when there's no communication and the expectations, so people are just showing up, they're expecting to play, and then all of a sudden they don't, and no one addresses it with them. That could be confusing, Erica, for you at Hopkins as an All-American. That would have maybe been confusing, let alone a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
So When I think, once you get to high performance, and I don't use that term lightly, like, there's some clubs out there, premier elite, and we wonder why kids have egos. Like, why are we calling a team premier elite in a town age group? So it would have to be older, like high school aged. And then there would have to be a good reason why, and really communicate with kids and families before. Here's where your child is now. Like, this is reality with time. Is that something you want? Because I think a lot of issues too come from being blindsided from it. But there's a lot of coaches. I know he just retired, but Doran's like playing all of the Chapel Hill players, subbing 8 at a time. And in a podcast, it says, if I'm going to recruit them, why wouldn't I develop them? So it's like, if Chapel Hill women's soccer can do it, I think ECNL can do it. And I think like Little League U12 can do it. I think U10 can do it. And so it's just about, the reason, I feel like the need for the book is, you and I go to these sport conferences. I've been going to them for 25 years, and it's these sport leaders and researchers talking, but who's getting the information out to the parents and the youth coaches in the community stepping up, which is why I love your work so much, of how you've educated me, you educate so many families. And I wanted to do the same regarding a lot of these topics, such as communication and athlete development and playing time. Those are some of the big takeaways in the book around playing time. We're not saying you show up, you don't try, you get rewarded with equal time. We're saying if you keep them, develop them, hold a high standard, everyone adhere to those standards.
So you say equal playing time before ages like 12 to 13 for sure?
Oh, I say a lot of playing time up until 14.
Yeah.
No, that's what I think. You see it in your communities, everyone who's listening. You see the kid who's on the third team, a late developer, okay? And you see the first team, early developers. And you see them at 8, you see them at 10, you see them at 12. And parents can get kind of stressed out because everybody's observing their kid be the beginner, right? And so, unfortunately, a lot of parents attach their ego to that. I say attach your ego to your child's ability to be a great teammate, and that's the goal. Okay? That's the goal. And then you watch in your communities these kids, these grinders who are having a joyful experience, so they stick with it. They're motivated and they have support. And the other ones are improving, but not at the rate. And why I really believe that the relative age can be a hindrance is because when these kids start getting this competition, they're having a hard time finding the joy, because they always associate joy with playing 100% of the time. So they get bitter, they switch clubs, because all of a sudden they're not the only shiny star on the team. And so what I'm trying to say is, have them all work to improve and develop, let them all reach high, like set high goals, and let it be normal to rotate kids in and out. I mean, they do it at a lot of college, like rotate kids in and out. Then you have that, then they're all playing with a high perceived competence, which leads to confidence and motivation. I explain it better in the book, I think.
I did like your confidence chapter, and I love that you said that for kids to develop confidence, they have to like be playing and developing those skills to begin with. So that's just another argument for that equal playing time in those impactful years before age 12, 13, 14. And there was something really cool in confidence there that you said it's about providing enough challenge so that the kid understands that they're capable, because that's like where the true confidence comes from. So can you maybe get into like a true versus false confidence when we're coaching kids?
Sure. False confidence. So, okay, let me think. So I'm thinking of the physical literacy wheel Sport for Life put out. And I had a collaborator on the book, my friend Richard Way, who's CEO of Sport for Life. And they did a lot of this work and along with the long-term athlete development model. But the physical literacy wheel is competence leads to confidence, which leads to motivation. And so it's cyclical. The interesting thing about competence, so how we feel about ourselves doing something, even if we're not really good at doing something, if we think we're good at it, that positively enhances our confidence in ourselves and our ability. So that's why it's so important for coaches and parents to be encouraging. Like, I can't believe you didn't do that. It's like, I love your effort, right? Like the language and the feedback that we give. False confidence is this where I feel sorry for early developers because they're given this sense of false confidence because they didn't really earn necessarily their standing on a team when they're not coming off, right? They showed up and they had great genetics. Awesome. But what happens then when they're always given all the time and they're early developer is there is a good chance, it doesn't mean it will happen, that they stop grinding, right? Or they never do, or they never learn how. And they can pick up very bad habits, such as not a second effort, or body language doesn't go their way, because they haven't had the chance to build that resilience. And so for them to build a true confidence, rather than just saying like you're playing 80% of the game, you want to be providing real, that's called task goal orientation. You want them to define success, all your athletes, as doing your best, doing better than you've ever done before, or learning something new, or mastering a skill, right? So if everyone in the team is focused on a task orientation, rather than an ego, which is being the best, like winning. That's how they define success. And like most coaches use a bit of both, right? But if you can set up an environment where the objective is always in line with a task goal orientation, you're going to be more likely to help each kid increase their competence and increase their confidence. And we all like to do things we're good at or that we think we're good at. Right? So think about what subject you did last in school. It was probably the one that you found most challenging. And what was the homework you picked up first to do? It was probably the one that came easiest to you. At least that was the case for me. And that was because we all like to do the things that we think we're pretty good at. It's why a lot of us don't learn how to do surfing or snowboarding in our 20s and 30s if we didn't learn it as kids. Right? So we want to think about that. How can we constantly be putting these young people into environments where they're learning something new so that they can become comfortable being stretched and being a beginner?
I love that, and I love what you said in the book about how the tasks that coaches set up should have, I think it's like a 60% success rate.
Yeah.
But it's not an impossible task that it completely crushes the kid. So this is really cool for coaches and also parents to keep in mind. Maybe if you're setting up games in the yard or whatever, it's enough of a challenge for the kid to figure out how to overcome and, like you said, develop that resiliency.
And Erica, you and I, so we both speak soccer because we both played soccer, and you a lot better than me. And there's a way that you can create a condition for the different skill levels on a team. Like, so for example, if you're saying everyone come early and juggle for a while before practice starts, I'll be here. Um, I might like this is for like a really more young community team where it's not really tiered. I can challenge people in different ways in that, right? So somebody might be just working on the thigh, somebody might be working on both feet, somebody might be working on head and chest. So we outline in the book as well ways that you can modify based on the task, the space, the timing, the equipment. You can modify so that everybody can choose that level where they have 60 to 80% success, because then they're going to still be motivated because it's like it's right there, I can get it, versus oh my gosh, I this is impossible for me, so I'm not even going to try. And that is a magic sweet spot. And it's easier to do when a team is tiered by skill, um, because the range isn't so big. But in local community level, you want to keep those community teams together because it's so much more than just skill development, those things. It's community and it's childhood memories. And there's a lot of benefit from trying to keep that recreational team together as well.
Now, I want to come back to the early versus late developers. You had a whole portion in your book about this. And of course, there's pros and cons to both. And like you, I love talking to parents of late developers because I think a lot of parents think, oh my gosh, like this sucks. Like my kid's the shortest, they're slowing down, they're not as strong as some of the other girls. And it's like, no, just wait it out because in the end, they usually are more successful. Is that correct based on the research?
I don't know that the research says that they're more successful, but I think what happened with some of, the one of Gladwell's book when he talked about the percentage of NHL players born in January and so forth. I think if all parents and coaches have to do to spin it when they're communicating with kids and with families is early developers can be robbed of things. And I think everybody talks about them in relative age as they're so lucky, they won the lottery. This is so great. But as a sports parent, to say, hey, I actually think you're at an advantage not being because you want to be in the chase and you don't want to peak at age 10. You don't want to peak at age 7. And I have 3 kids and they're all kind of different in terms of if they're early or late developers. And I'm just trying to spin it good for all of them. So we don't want anyone walking around if they're privileged enough to get to play to play sport to think that like the world's against them. So let's just stay positive here and let's frame it in a way. You're an early developer, you have a unique opportunity if you stay hungry and you stay disciplined to continue to develop and who knows where that, who knows, and keep adjusting goals accordingly. If you're a late developer, isn't it fun to be in that chase? Isn't that fun to build resilience? Isn't that fun to feel so empowered? Isn't that fun? You get to continue to develop your skills. So I think that both can be just fine. And I think the narrative has been early developers and relative age lottery winners are so fortunate. And I'm just saying that I don't think it's a negative if your child's a late developer or doesn't have that high relative age compared to their peers chronologically. I feel like it's the messaging from the parents and from the coaches how we can help them all to feel just fine where they are and also hungry to develop.
Yeah, I think the onus is really big on the coaches too, and I've seen this a lot with late developers. The team coach will kind of do that end of the year evaluation, and in the physical section, they're like, "You need to work on your speed," and I'm like, "Well, genetically and where they're at in their journey right now, like they can't really control much compared to the other girls. You can still provide them some speed training, some great variety, keep the speed training fun, but it's also like I feel presenting it that way can be challenging because parents are like, "Oh, they're the slow kid on the team."
I know. And that's where this comparative culture is so challenging. One thing that I would love for coaches is don't over reward the fast kid because you don't want to stunt their skill development. And I'd always say to coaches, don't drool over the fast kid and look over the more skilled kid because that skilled kid, if they're not fast, they probably had to put in 3 times the time to get that skill than other kids, right? Because you're not just like a late developer in one area. You're not super skilled and slow genetically. You're typically you win the lottery or you don't, right? So it's like, how can you put the same amount of positivity on each and understand that a team needs both? And obviously, we're talking a little more team sport here, but regardless of what that is, look to see, yes, you got natural talent, but that kid may not have any work ethic. So celebrate, be happy for them with the natural ability, and then say to them, hey, you got this. You need to really up this ante and say to someone else, look, maybe you didn't win the lottery in speed, but your mentality and your discipline, wow, like no one's going to count you out wanted to know that. So I feel like, you see these things online. It drives me absolutely insane that, if you work hard, this will all happen for you. Not necessarily. Like at some level in high performance, you need both. It's why I competed at the national or the provincial level, but wasn't quite good enough for the national level, right? So it's like, at some point, you're going to need it all. So let's help them all to gather it all and not over reward the kids who genetically are fast. I've never seen the super skilled kid be over rewarded compared to a super fast kid.
Yes.
I just haven't
I
seen,
haven't either. Yeah.
yeah. And they're
And
going to get faster and stronger because if they're wired to get so skilled, they're wired to someone's guiding them in the right way, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. And I just want to add on that everyone is unique. And when you do compare to other parents' kids on the team, that's where things get a little bit hairy, especially during these growth spurt years, because everyone's on their own journey. Everyone's just like letting the clock tick. It's like focus on those strengths and recognize, okay, what are some things that I can work on that are in my control?
Absolutely. And never talk to your kid ugly about someone else's child, and their physical, I've heard that. I've had people say to me, so and so was talking ugly about my child. And I mean, no, you keep it positive about everyone. You're going to protect the joy. And every parent needs to remember that every pro makes mistake. All of these sports are games of mistakes, right? So it's like how that's the one thing we know. And tell your kids, the one thing I know that's going to happen today is you're going to make a mistake. And I still love you, right? I do push back in the book a bit about the whole I love to watch you play. I like to say I like to watch you hustle when you hustle, but I'm not like I am very warm and fuzzy. But if they're not trying to this point of equal time, if they're not doing their best for their team, um, I don't need to offer it up. But if they ask, I'll just say, I didn't see as much hustle today as I often do. Um, what do you think about that? You know, this idea that you can't say anything or you can only say this, that's what this book is trying to get away from. I would like to think as parents and professionals, we're more thoughtful than that. There, you don't get in the car and like yell at them. You don't get in the car and talk ugly about the goalie. You just are a thoughtful parent, just like with school. We don't need to overcomplicate this.
Right. And I like how you can pose it as a question too. Oh, what did you think of your hustle today? Kind of after some time has transpired and they want to open up. I think that's fair.
I think it is like this idea of true confidence. So, when they say don't say anything, does that mean that like we're okay with someone not competing? Like I
Yeah.
think what I got from sport is compete in the world, compete. But I'm competing against myself only ever. I'm only competing against myself. And if we can teach that to the kids, like that just means like I'm trying to show up and do my best. And I got that from sport. And that's what we're trying to teach our kids. And you know what? If they're exhausted because they were up late studying for a test and there's all these reasons why maybe they weren't, that context is important too. Like, you know what? You've had a busy week. I'm impressed you showed up and did your best. It wasn't your typical, but you know what? You're here and you did your best. And like sometimes that's all we have. Like that's okay to say because there's some days that my best is like subpar compared to others. I mean, they're kids,
Yeah. Well,
and it's just like we often treat kids in sport like adults. We have these expectations that adults don't reach. It's like this is messed up. And then we're going to, blame everyone else for it.
yeah.
I don't
Well, it also with like talking to your kid about how they did and having them reflect, it's comes back to your education analogy. If your kid's not doing their homework and studying, it's not like you're not going to say anything. But with sports, everyone's like, don't say anything. And it's like, well, if they were a bad sport or yelled at the ref, like, I kind of need to step in as a parent. That's not acceptable.
I know. And I love that you just said that if they're being a bad sport, because like two of my three kids were in a tournament this weekend, and I actually received a couple texts from parents throughout the weekend of their respective teams, and the parents were they were talking about my kids as teammates. So the parents took time to shoot me a text. I wasn't there, and they said like so and so, she reaches out to my daughter. She calls her this nickname. She puts her arm around her. My daughter isn't really confident, and it means so much to her when she does that. And someone else was like, on a team that's so stacked, I just want to say your daughter makes my daughter feel so welcomed, and she was intimidated to be on the team. And I was like, this is like, I won the lottery. Like, I don't like, this is what is really important to me. And yes, I am human. I am stoked for them when they get to have a moment where all their hard work comes to, comes to fruition on the field, and they get to have this wonderful moment with their teammates. I love that for them. But I also was like able to say, I didn't see any of the games. I'm just so proud of the teammate I heard you were. Like, that means so much to me. And I feel like character, I talk in the book about how some of these tournament structures don't foster development. Like, it goes to goals 4. And so you'd be in this tournament and it's like running up the score instead of maybe trying people at a different position or having them pass 10 times or whatever way you could make it so that the kids could develop and the other team wouldn't be so demoralized. Right. And I look at the tournament structures and some of these things, and there's so much unique opportunity. Instead of goals 4, maybe we talk about those with the fewest fouls, or, and people will roll in their eyes. But I mean, you see some bad things. You see bad body language. You see bad words. You see, sport doesn't just build a character, but it reveals it. Right. And so how can we celebrate the teams that are focused on doing the right things the right way?
Now, this kind of segues into the research from, is it Dr. Visek, the Fun Maps research?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was, he surveyed coaches, parents, and young athletes and asked them to share examples of what fun looks like to them in a sports setting. And in order of importance, they listed being a good sport, trying hard, positive coaching, learning, and improving. So those were the top 4 for making the sports experience fun. And then I wasn't shocked at the last few, but I think it would shock some people. But the least important for fun were team rituals and swag. And the swag one made me laugh because just in a world of social media and a lot of clubs trying to outdo each other, have better uniforms, have the Instagram posts, have the media days for U10 teams, it is a little absurd that that's the focus on the social media. And I just kind of laughed at the swag one, that was what people ranked last as like the most fun and memorable part of the sport experience. But the being a good sport, the trying hard, and the positive coaching were the top. And that's amazing.
Yeah. And learning, improving, number 4.
Yes.
Development, right? And look, they're talking here about, when I talked about task goal orientation, how you define success, trying hard, doing your best. And kids can identify if they're in a task involved motivational climate or an ego involved. My own graduate research looked at that. Dr. Amanda Visick and the Fun Map research is really interesting. She's at a George Washington University. And really cool, just for context, these are these were competitive soccer players that were interviewed and surveyed for this body of knowledge. And the reason why she wanted to explore, like, how do they define fun, is because of what we started the podcast with. Kids quit sport when it's not fun, and they want to play sport when it is fun. So if we know that character, effort, positivity, and development are the top 4 things that kids say make sport fun, now we have a very clear roadmap as to what our practices, what our culture is going to look like. And in order for that to come to life, there's the chapter on communication and the chapter on the student athlete mental well-being, I think are really important. They help those together with this information. They give sport leaders, directors, coaches, and parents a real guide as to how this comes to life and throughout a season and throughout a child's journey. What the book is not saying is that when there is some struggle, it's time to move on because that's not fun. The book is not saying that kids shouldn't be held to a high standard because that's not fun. There's no point of that. We really advocate for a high standard, positive though, right? Like strong communication. We kind of poke fun at the 24-hour rule. Instead of a 24-hour rule, which speaks to the lowest common denominator of a parent, how about a policy around, if you were to reach out during a tournament or within this amount of time, you were to do so first via email with very professional language that you would be okay to see published on, I was going to say front page of a newspaper, but I guess like I'm getting old
Chat
now.
GPT.
Yeah, Chat GPT. So it's like, I mean, how about we adjust that policy a little bit to leave space for thoughtful people who care about kids that need context to do what's right for a kid. I don't believe that kids aren't tough. I don't believe that parents are all completely like crazy. And I don't believe that coaches are uninformed. I think that there's a little bit of wonderful in everybody in all groups, and that some are stronger than others at certain times, but we need to come together and not poke fingers at one another. Easy for me to say because I'm a coach and a parent, but I think parents get a really bad rap. And so what I wanted to do was create something for a sport parent that's a guide to help them in these intense moments because they had no training for it. I wanted to create a guide for coaches who aren't educated on adolescent and child psychology, but care deeply about kids and want to give back through sport. So hopefully I did that. We'll see.
If you have a few more minutes, I do want to talk about the 24-hour rule real quick, because this was something you actually changed my mind on after I read the book. But I've had scarring experiences as a coach where I've been chased down in the parking lot, people screaming at me. But like you said, like that's like the least common denominator, and it just doesn't make the general population that is sports parents look good. But you and I both know that there are amazing parents out there. There are families that are incredible. And like you have the one person that gives you a traumatic experience. But I do think the way parents approach that playing time conversation instead of chasing someone down in the parking lot is critical. And you talk about the courageous conversations in the book, which I loved. And just kind of coming back to the education example, like if a kid was sent to the principal's office, you would want to know why. And if a kid's not playing during a tournament weekend, you would want to know why before the next game and why they're benched. So maybe just like talk about that and how parents can have these courageous conversations without coming off as combative to the coach.
I love that you're bringing up this idea of, if you look at the education example, the reason why there's a chalkboard in the background of the cover is because I want it comes down to that first thing, like, why are we doing it so different in school? Like the great part of learning in school and teaching, why is it so different? And the norms, why are they so different in sport? We would never think twice about reaching out to a teacher if a child was not doing what we believe they should be doing. So with the one thing about communication and courageous conversations, you have these tournaments, right? Kids are flying all over the country to play a sport. There's 4 to 6 games in a weekend. And let's say it's the first game of the tournament and the kid's not getting in or gets in for 5%. And you got 4 more games in the next 48 hours. And there's a whole other conversation whether that should be happening or not. Okay. But let's just sit that on the shelf for a little minute. And are we really not allowed to have a conversation about that? Because like, look what's happening. Like, look what's about to happen. So I feel like, okay, we're not going to have a 24-hour rule, parents. Before tournaments, 2 things should happen, or before games. Everyone should kind of know what to expect. I think a lot of the emotion and the reaction to being chased down in a parking lot is because people aren't expecting it. They just spent $5,000. They flew their family across the country. They're at a hotel that they had to stay at because it's state of play. And they're going without to do this. You know, all of us sports parents, we could have really nice things. But, and so it's like, so we should be able to have a conversation if our child is, and maybe in that conversation, we're being told our child's being a terrible teammate. Okay. I don't know about you, but I would say, okay, then this is an absolute fair consequence if she's being a terrible teammate. And I understand not everyone's going to say that. So my first things are, I don't think there's anything wrong with the parent before a tournament. They're like, we're going here. Okay, what's the playing time policy for this tournament? So that you can make an informed decision. Because parents, I want you to know you can say no. You can say no. And you have that right to say no. And you don't have to feel like you have to do every single thing just because you think everybody else is doing every single thing. The second thing, if they say things like the playing time will be fair and balanced, ask them to quantify that. Because what's fair and balanced? In my experience, fair and balanced has been the early developers will get a lot of time. It doesn't really matter how they conduct themselves. And like, you know, in some things is what people tell me. So I want to quantify. And there's nothing, you're not being combative or controversial. You're just saying, you know, this is a lot for our family. I just need to know some pieces of information before we make the decision. So a lot of it you have, that shouldn't be a courageous conversation, but it could be viewed as that because it's not the norm. So get as much information as you can. Then if there's a policy around playing time that they make you, or a waiver about communication, they make you click before your child can participate, say, hey, you might, like, I'm not crazy and you're not crazy. And like, I'm not expecting to need to talk to you while we're there. However, if my child's wellness, like this is a child and I'm not coddling my child, if something makes you feel icky, it's probably icky. You know, like these are our kids. The same way with school. If something feels off, we would call the principal, we'd call the teacher, we'd have a nice conversation as collaborators, a positive conversation. You know, the tagline for the book, a positive collaborative approach to youth sport. Conversations don't mean controversy or aggression. Conversations mean collaboration. And so can we not discuss this to come up with an appropriate plan to protect the joy? And it goes to like, how big's the roster? Because that can be challenging. Like you know, there's certain things, if a roster is going to be over a certain amount, I might not, you know, you look at minutes, the dollars per minutes of development. All this is about development and it's a lot. There's a lot of opportunities for kids to travel. But you don't just have to do what you think coach is telling you to do. And I don't mean that in disrespect to our amazing coaches. My kids have incredible coaches. But there's some kids on my older daughter's team this winter who decided not to do indoor field hockey because it was another trip or two and it was too much travel. And everybody respects that. No one's upset. It wasn't any kind of drama or controversy. It was families making the decision that was best for their family.
I love that. And I think like everyone listening just needs to get this book because
Aw.
it's just very refreshing. And I think it gives parents just some very clear guidance because a lot of them just fear, oh, well, I'm going to be that overbearing, crazy parent that like traumatizes coaches. But you give very great, actionable solutions on how they can collaborate with the coach and approach it in a way that is respectful and just overly communicative. I think that's really the theme in all this is we have to all work together to make sure that our kids are getting a joyful experience. So Amanda, thank you for writing this. Thank you for coming on the podcast to discuss how we can protect the joy. My last question is a surprise question. How would you define a strong female athlete since this is the Strong Female Athlete podcast?
A strong female athlete is one who shines her light on others, on her team. You're doing that right now by inviting another woman on your podcast and promoting her book for her. A strong female athlete does her best for her team. A strong female athlete is always happy when a teammate shines. And a strong female athlete, likes to like physically get after it and feel empowered. It's okay for her to have an opinion. It's okay for her to listen to others' opinion. And it's also okay to disagree at the end of the day and still like have positive relationships. And I think in 2025, all of these things are so needed. Yeah, that's what I think.
Awesome. Well, everyone, make sure you check out the book. I'll leave the link in the caption below, as well as Amanda's website, her Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I don't know
I
why I can't
know, I
call it
know. That's
X
where we met.
anymore. It's
That's where we met.
crazy.
And if
Yes,
you
we met
if
on Twitter.
you did, and if you're able to leave a review, if you like it, or if you don't, an honest review would be great. I'm really looking forward to getting this messaging out there, and to helping keep more kids in sport for longer periods of time.
Well, thank you, Amanda, and everyone. I will see you on the next episode.